You're maxed out. How'd that happen?
Okay, I'll be Kobe Bryant, and you be the front desk girl.
Oh, I get nailed in the ass and the wife gets the diamond? Let me turn around for you.
Yeah, we're going there with this one. Looking back upon cable television and how certain their markets were, with over 200 channels for the most part, channels were, of course, going to be catering to specific groups. Of course, now in comparison, not anyone can tell you why we would need a network for golf. Then I'll ask why we needed a channel for a lot of other things that we would have. There's a lot of shows that get reruns on multiple networks and people are fine with it. But around this time, within the 90s heading into the 2000s, people were making more money and wanted more to buy out of it. And instead of nowadays where you would have 3 streaming services that you would have to pay subscriptions for just to get all the stuff that you want, cable television was pretty much doing the exact same thing, but instead of just the shows that you wanted to watch, you would have to buy like 20 extra channels for it. And so if you wanted to watch MTV, you would have to buy this cable package just to get this channel and all these other ones that nobody would care about. Hell, even South Park made a joke about this.
Oh, I'm sorry, our company doesn't work that way. You want me to give you the number of a different cable company that can...
But with everyone getting channels, from teenagers getting stuff that was catered to them, young kids, sports fans, women, genres that were getting their own channels just to have 24/7 coverage of it. And well, there was a set of people that weren't getting their own network, and that would be men. Now, typically, men did have certain channels that would exist, and that would be more or less upon their hobbies that were just general around that time. Stuff like guns, TV, sports channels, and all the other things that would cater to men. But one thing that we didn't get as men is a channel for our own sense of humor, as no one really tried to get this demo to have their own network. And of course, there would be the graveyard slots that catered to them around midnight to 3 a.m. and the afternoon to 3 p.m. Executives just really thought men liked the witching hour, and the witching hour was their own doing. But around this time, we start to see networks that would cater to men. Channels such as the Nashville Network, or later that will become TNN, a country TV channel that would broadcast country music, motorsports, and other things curating to the southern demographic. They also had ECW for a cup of coffee, by the way. But with the purchase from Viacom, they would rebrand from TNN as TNN, the national net. They would be going for the TNT USA TBS market of 18 to 49-year-old men, or better known as the key demo in a lot of places. And how would they be doing this? Well, they would be picking up shows that were shown late a lot of times and or primetime television, and would be broadcasting it there, and gathering programs that would drive men to their network, such as slam ball, mixed martial arts, professional wrestling, and especially then at the time WWF or WWE with Monday Night Raw, programs that you would totally expect men would want. Robots, showing stuff, and everything around those things. And in the easiest of ways, as much women like seeing the dramas of celebrities and, pro athlete wives, men wanted to see actual things happen such as sports and, in a lot of ways, seeing drama of professional wrestling. Does anybody remember Katie Vick, or is that just me?
I screwed your brains out.
But as in the summer of 2003, TNN would rebrand as Spike TV to get more of an action-oriented demographic towards men. This would be the definitive relaunching and trying to capture the audience of men. For Spike Lee filed a lawsuit suing them because people thought that it would be branded with his name. This would be the time where they would try to expand their audience and putting on new programming. Not just old television shows, but actually putting on their own thing for the unemployed and people that wanted to watch the Game Awards. One of these days I'm going to look back on these. They would create their own series, and the first batch of original program would be animated, in which it would be catered for men and what they wanted. Boobs, raunchy broness, and law. With those 4 shows being determined by those qualities, we would try to figure out what they would be, and in a lot of ways wondering what happened to them and why they didn't really success there. This would be the time before they would actually gain their success of how crazy and random they would be later on into the 2000s and into the early 10s, with shows like 1,000 Ways to Die and Mansard. And look, this is going to be an interesting look back on these shows, and so grab your Doritos, your Cold Red Mountain Dew, and we're heading back in time to see how bad these first run of animated shows for Spike TV was.
Character development?
Bingo.
Are you guys done staring at my character development?
With this video really being just about men liking breasts, let's take the idea of what a man peels in a grapevine, such as Stan Lee, creating a hero for this program. Stripperella, a show about a dancer that has a double life, erotic dancing by day, superherodom by night.
Listen! Let's just keep it PG.
Stripperella is a show that is not just a show to be erotic, but with something to be with the name of Stripperella. Of course, you're going to be getting something in that flavor. A cheesy, raunchy, gallery of exposed breasts and action. And if you can get a pass to the fact that her abilities of just being sexy is one of her superpowers, this is actually a diamond in the rough for Spike TV. I will at least throw cheers with Pam Anderson and being the voice actress of this. The humor can be described, in my opinion, as markish as I can be, is being very knowledgeable and referential around the time, with some having a good seconds of being ad-lib, like throwing said at secret tracking devices you would have to clap to activate, but also be referring of her boss being Chief Stroganoff, Queen Clitoris, and Stimpy Wood. I don't have to make those jokes, do I? Anyways, the basics of the plot is your typical late night side heroes of galore. He's going down the friggin' the baddest superheroes and trying to stop them, and yet most of the time with these episodes, it goes where the villain shows up and interacts with them. And later on, for stopping that villain in particular, we would face each other and going back into status pretty much every episode. And of course, with this show like this, you wonder what are some of the villains' names could be. With a character like Stripperella, well, you'll get Cheapo the Cheap, villain that robs the 89-cent store, Linko, Pushy Galore, that adapts foreigners just to have her in her factory, and just animal cruelty. It's surprising how these episodes actually do have a good bit of pride of swallowing with pretty much bizarro villains, and giving out actually good structured episodes with. And yeah, just looking at this character, being a stripper, Stripperella's design and its whole design philosophy with this whole show is actually pretty interesting when you're looking around that time period of superhero shows. Shows exploding in popularity around that time, being more on the DC side of things, does take inspiration from those shows, but being something from the lane of Stan Lee, you would think that this would be more on the Marvel side of the demographics of how provocative these characters can look, especially with Stripperella.
Yeah, that brother's starving.
And I'll be real, not a lot of these characters needed to look like that they would actually be fitting into their own universe, because in the simple fact that these needed to be in its own form and its own identity. It has no ties into any of the MCU in a lot of ways, but with a rogues gallery like this, I kind of expected them to actually have more than just one season of this. And honestly, from watching these episodes, I think that they would have planned it for another season. There's just a lot of things that you can see in this show that they actually did put an effort in, and it's not just because of the sexual innuendos a lot of times, but they were actually interesting plots in these. That's not just Stripperella just changing outfits just for the sake of it. That yes, I'm actually surprised of how these characters function, especially with the Rogues Gallery. Having something like, I don't know, a bridesmaid being a villain, and then having the other episodes having more mundane and typical characters that would be, I guess you would say, innuendo oriented, would actually make these characters and villains be more stunning in a lot. But leave it off with this, there's actually more of a surprising amount of voices that were actually in this series. Kid Rock, of course, playing Stimpy Wood, and as himself for the most part, you would actually have voices from the WWE such as Vince McMahon as Dirk McMahon. Isn't that obvious? Bridesmaid was played by Kathy Griffin. Need I say more? And yet you can definitely spot when Tom Kenny was actually voice acting some of the characters. And overall, I was actually surprised of seeing that, even though yes, it's from Viacom, but oh my god, imagine if they had this voice for...
This is the only, if it wasn't for the Christmas shit, I wouldn't fucking work. This is the only time of the year that I fucking work. It pisses me.
But if you can actually watch Stripperella, I would actually say that I do recommend it, even though of how raunchy it can be and how just, man, they really just wanted to see this big-tittied women do some secret agent shit. It's actually a pretty good show. If you can get past the fact that, yeah, there's a lot of eye candy stuff that probably wouldn't like if you're one of those people, it's actually a good show, especially compared to a lot of adult-oriented cartoon shows.
It's like UPN.
Great. So instead of watching the NCAA tournament, we're stuck here watching...
This show is considered partially lost, so I can't really give my full-on analysis and opinion on it. But I will just say this, that I do give a shout out to Bob Kiwi for making these public for what I can see for now. This just then follows Brian Newport, a conservative news reporter at a bar drinking with his pals, talking about politics and whatever's going on with the culture around this time. Don't forget, around this time of the Iraq War, 9/11's patriotism was high. wrestling fans lost for what happened with Katie Vick and all the other things that Vince McMahon would do around this time period of the early 2000s, just before us realizing that Dick Cheney would shoot a man a couple years later. And well, this show is your typical post 9/11 humor world. Immediately with the second episode was with the government taking away Henry Q because of the bartender looking like a terrorist. You kind of see where this is going with, right? They do make jokes about that makes modern shows feel like it will be offensive and look like child's play. Yeah, especially with jokes are mainly with stereotype, with most of the time being brown fears, circling jokes back into current events. Like, if you don't know what's going on, you would feel so out of loop with a lot of things. Plus, I don't like Newport. Selfish characters can be good enough to have the comeuppance, or at least if they're very comedic enough that it can actually be more enjoyable to see their hijinks. But with Newport being a journalist, I immediately have to peg them down just because of being a journalist. And it's in a lot of ways of the show just being so in its time that it's not really compelling to see what it does in a lot of ways to be so 2000s, because it's not really that in a lot of ways. It's just that to say. You have episodes where he gets his place taken over, and how Jimmy the black guy would actually be a more compelling protagonist than he is, because the thing about Newport is simply the fact that Newport is a manipulative character. He doesn't have any charisma that makes him more or less a character to root for or a character to see whatever happens to him. Just don't want to hang out with Newport because of how poor of a man that he is. And it is sad to say that, because you do have characters that are jerk asses and characters that are just stereotypes of what people would find to be true around the era of the early 2000s. Of course, you have the fiery Latina that is also an activist that also believes that a lot of things should be fixed, because not because of it's good for people, but in the humanity's sake of things. Of course, you have the jokes about the white guy getting an Asian girlfriend and finding out the Asian girlfriend is practically just, how do I say this? Very demanding. There you go. And hell, you can even see this with the episode about Brian Newport getting an award for his journalism. And practically it was him satirizing what the left media was doing around this time with how they were treating the war and whatnot. In which, in all actuality, it was just for him to get a date with this news anchor that he would think that wouldn't want him. But then when the awards come out, he actually shows that he actually has a heart and actually tells the truth. And there's nothing wrong with a character like that, but with something that is like this, where it involves politics, it does give a sense of feeling just bending of the wrist, because it does use jokes that actually satirizes the Clintons, but yet it's not in the way of making them seem funny, but making them seem creepy because of the joke about Bill Clinton's impeachment trial.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
The show just uses its vulgarity just for the sake of it. There's nothing really topical about it, unless that they're just going to go and punch the jab at the current event. And yes, of course, this was made with Flash around this time so they can be more topical, but yet making a joke about Kobe Bryant's rape allegations just like this isn't really humorous. And this is not because of Kobe's passing, but it's how the joke is structured. The fact that this joke goes from him not having enough money for tickets to the movie that they want to see, all because he hired a stripper and he wanted to do roleplay, kind of just makes me say, wow, that wasn't even funny for you to try. And it isn't the joke being that she's willing to do it because of the credit card, but it was the fact that she said she's not good enough for a ring, but she's taking it up the ass. Listen, it's not because of those things that make it unfunny, but it's the fact that you went there and you didn't even have anyone chuckle, but you just had people just say, thanks for stating the obvious. And I'm not saying that this joke could have been constructively better. This was just a cruel joke for the sake of it. I would have enjoyed that if they actually used basketball terms like going into the paint, where the joke would have been more of the crazier side of using that sense of humor and actually putting it as just Brian Newport being kind of a sick freak. I guess it's the 2000s and taking it up the butt is the freaky thing that you can do. It's like the show tries to be topical, but the thing about being topical is that you have to be smart with a lot of the things that you talk. The thing is that a lot of times they just use whatever political figure that was on around that time talking and just saying that they're pussy or poopy head in a lot of ways. And to put it in the most perfect way of perspective, no one likes when you just make fun of a politician just because you call him worse in a lot of ways. If you're not going to give a nuanced critique, then there's no point of having it. Even when Family Guy did these kind of jokes, Family Guy did it, especially around this time period, in a way that made it sound relatable and actually made it sound like they actually had a genuine cause issue with. You had Hurricane Katrina, where yes, it is political political to do this joke. The thing was that since everyone picked the George Bush around that time to be a dumb, it was more of a where the joke wasn't the tragedy, but it was his actions, what happened during the tragedy. But there were already shows that were doing current events just better. South Park was making fun of everything but politics, but in those seasons that they did throw jabs into politics, it didn't feel like that they had a big issue with one side or the other, but they were drawing jabs at both sides. This just doesn't, and that's just from what I was watching. From having a pro-war rally in the bar and having all these stereotypes about soy men that even Andrew Tate wouldn't even laugh, it just feels like that this Just In was just a sad attempt to try to put something that's current, but yet not really get why people liked shows like South Park, with it being topical more or less, without feeling like you're being lectured to. With all the jokes that this show does, there's been better ones done by shows that have more cachet. It doesn't feel like that they were being hilarious, but it just felt like that they were just saying what was going on already and stating the obvious.
Today's talking points: Medicare is scheduled to go bankrupt in 2019, and diabetes is at an all-time high. What do these things have in common? Your fat ass.
Without being topical with it. In the simplest of ways, if this was on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, this would be the punchline of most jokes in conservative media.
Starting tonight at 9.
I will litigate you all into annihilation!
Only on Spike TV.
Gary Andrews, attorney at law, and the mouse in the hall. Gary the Rat is what's the name, a rat that deals with the court system of New York City. With him being on the rise of the justice system world, he strangely gets turned into a rat before losing his job in New York, with people actually finding being in law strangely a thing that they would want. And with episodes as the trials go on, and being the last graceful assholes in the world, lawyers with cases helping with such as big tobacco, a guy with leprosy, and a crime-ridden family. With shows like every Birdman, I'm sure that there was a market for shows like this to at least be experimented upon, but this is not something that you experiment upon, especially back then, not because as people didn't like the law, but it's just because there's really no, I guess I would call, analogy into a lot of these, especially with the network that it's on. Just didn't feel like that this would be their best decision to have as one of their main shows being in. Because let's be real, what are they putting for 23 minutes in solving the law? It doesn't really feel like a show that would be a detective show, but more of a show that more deals with the office of a law firm. But instead of that, it more goes on to whatever goes on into the case, we figure out what's the issue, and Gary finds a solution into that issue, and pretty much being what I just said about lawyers, being an asshole about it. But with this, we actually have one of the bigger side plots of the show, and that is that Gary nearly gets evicted from his apartment, in which neighbors decide to kick him out because of him being a rat and pretty much causing their property to go down. And Gary pretty much just gives them an open threat saying, if you kick me out, I'll sue all of you. And so one of the neighbors actually gets a rat killer, and it's this guy. Yeah. And so the show goes into something happens at law, Gary tries to find a solution with it, and this guy trying to chase him down and kill him. And to put it like this, I don't think it works because of that part alone. Of course, especially nowadays, you can totally have a show like this and work it out where you can make Gary an actually interesting character to actually put up against the legal system. But this is the 2000s we're talking about. And especially in the 2000s, the demographic for men's shows, especially for stuff like this, wasn't going to go anywhere, especially. It just feels like this character here is just so out of place with this show that it doesn't make sense, because just because he's a dumb character that is just doing this for money because the neighbor doesn't like him is a interesting idea, but it really doesn't work, especially with the idea of law. This isn't a slapstick, but this is more under the lens of being a comedy and yet a sitcom at the same time. Honestly, I think this would have been better in the way of explaining that this guy was wronged by Gary the Rat in one of the trials, and so you can give a justification for it, but just making it just purely that, oh, he's a dumb rat killer. let's do that. The art direction is in such a weird design that it feels like that they wanted to go with something that was aligned with Jackie Chan Adventures, but yet since they were using Flash, and especially this is the early 2000s version of Flash where you had insurance commercial being the face of Flash at time being, yeah, this doesn't really work in a lot of ways. And trust, Flash goes into a different direction where it actually becomes a very good medium for shows that are started there. But yet it just really feels like that they just wanted to have something that was cheap enough, and it's just unappealing a lot of times. Character designs look weird, and it's not weird in the way of they look odd but charming, but what the hell is this? But then you get characters that look like this, and honestly I'm fine with, but then you just get me questioning on why the hell did you do this now? But I do at least appreciate that they do try to give more of a nuanced take on Gary's transformation into a rat. That it more in the later episodes go on about, well, Gary is an asshole. Gary Andrews is the embodiment of a pretty bad dude in a lot of ways. And it does go into the questioning of why did he turn into a rat, and that does become another side story. But the main thing is that we don't really get a solution a lot of ways. It's just used for comedic efforts just as a way to throw it around the bus of Gary just a ratty kind. And look, I've seen Gary Andrews' apartment. He's the Patrick Bateman without the psychopathic character. But at least in the way of being cartoony, it just gets lost in its obscurity. I'm saying this as someone seeing the ongoing plot, and honestly, I don't think any network would have taken this. And even if it was developed now with more nuanced takes into all of this, I don't really think a streaming service really taking this by any chance because of just how dumb the premise is. But yet, if it just leaked itself, it would have more or less been interesting done. And the best way to really describe Gary the Rat, the show, is simply, it feels like that this would have been a one-off episode on something like The Simpsons where the character is a rat, not because bad person, but it's just because it's a rat at law. You're more surprised that seeing the rat is doing that than anything else. It's just a show, and a show could have had a better chance if it was made later on in any time period of the current era. But knowing how stuff are, we would have probably had the same faith in a lot of ways. It's a show, and just a show. And I do feel like it would have had a better chance with a couple revisions, but it's just not enough for it to be a smart show. But it's on Spike TV. What do you expect from people that had Mansers? But of course, this is the production that isn't bad per se, but it could have been better again. But the best way to describe Gary the Rat, it's boring. It tries to be funny, but like law, it's not. If you need me, I need to call my mother because this is not funny.
I have to go now. Just tell the nurses that your bedpan's leaking. I'm sure they'll get you a new one. Bye.
The all-new adult party cartoon premieres Thursday at 10 p.m. on Spike TV.
The most notorious of the TV, Ren and Stimpy's adult party cartoon. The one that constantly gets re-uploaded on Twitter that says, this was on a kid show. Ren and Stimpy adult party cartoon is why Ren went to therapy. It's everything that you think that it is, made by the original show of Ren and Stimpy. You would think that this would be a smart, but yet cruel show from what it was originally, with things that would make everyone at least get a smile out of it. And well, sadly, what John K. brought was not that. And sadly, exactly knowing what he did later on, we're not going to be mentioning any of that, so get that out of your head. But jokes about bodily fluid, poop physics, and things that would make Dead or Alive jealous, these sexual jokes, it makes Netflix look PG in comparison. The one thing I'll give its flower for is the backgrounds of these episodes, that it actually looks really beautiful, and they actually did take their time on them. But with a show like Adult Party Cartoon, it just doesn't anything besides erasing one of the extra stars I would have given it for how bad it is to be lesser it should be. With the show more or less having more of what I would say the typical things that shows in the 2000s would do, and that would be more of a cliche jokes where people are together are always questioning if they're gay or not, but yet they go a little into what I like to call playing with it more than ever. It's not like that I don't know, they were all gay, but yet they're not gay. It just hanged out a lot. It is especially put as referenced in jokes that they are a couple a lot of times. Even to me, it even makes characters that are gay and Family Guy seem like it's comedy gold, not because it's them playing with the maybe he is or maybe it's not. Ren and Stimpy decides to do those kind of jokes, but instead, they like going and chopping wood off the stump without having any wood onto that stump. It would have made those typical fans and typical kids that grew up with Ren and Stimpy seeing this show, being teenagers and young adults, to see this just to say, wow, that's bad. But I get it that these jokes aren't for me per se. These are for the next generation of boys that think that watching TV makes them adult in comparison. And of course, there's your raunchy humor, your expressive faces, and all those other things that were placated in Ren and Stimpy. But yet, the one thing I'm going to say is this, is that it goes too far, and not in the way of going too far with cruelty, more in the ways of it depicting of character. Ren seeks help everyone, where Ren and Stimpy gets into an argument in which Ren probably said some really cruel shit that we're not known of, but Stimpy is crying his eyes out because of that. And so, with everything that transpires, Ren decides to go to therapy because of all the things that has happened, and we learn Ren's backstory of his depiction of his own cruelty, from getting slapped in the ass as a child to taking legs off of a bug. We see his 6 steps of becoming the monster that he is, and it's just cruel. There's nothing funny about this. There's nothing comedic about it. It's just agonizing to see Ren just torture creatures. It isn't like in classic cartoons, something like Tom and Jerry, where it's more of expressive. No, we are seeing literally these characters get torture, and there's nothing funny about it. And I'm not saying this as to say that it's the current year with this, but I can totally think that people would not find this funny to see a frog literally get his intestines pulled out by the bike without no comedic justice. The difference between this and slapstick is that the fact that slapstick let these characters get expressively hit never feel like that they were getting tortured. It didn't feel like that these characters' blood was just gonna gush out, is what I'm saying. It even gets to the point that seeing Ren and his mother and father actually try to tell him that it's better to kill him because guess what? He's torturing and this is from your own actions. And then we see him grabbing his wife's ass. Did I say this was for adults? Yes, of course it's for adults. But yet, Ren doesn't do that and just lets him stay tortured because he feels enjoyment from the fact that killing him will give him sweet paradise. And like, Jesus Christ, why the hell is this an episode? What this episode tries to pull a 180 saying the therapist, the horse, is just a normal person, but yet early on before we'd seen Ren get in to the room of the therapist. Like, oh my god. But what happens is that Ren just crashes out and beats the horse before people come in and try to stop him. It just feels like that they just wanted to have this scene right here of Ren just crashing out to just have everything else around it be icing on the cake. The episode ends with the frog ending himself. I guess that's what they wanted with this episode. But look, you want gross out, they can eat boogers. But by the end of all of this, it just felt so crude that I didn't even want to watch the rest of these 6 episodes. I know this was a bad episode to start, but come on. But by the end of watching all of these shows, and by the end of watching all these episodes, it just felt like that John K and the creators of this were in the doghouse with their wives, and they were extremely horny and they wanted to express themselves with. Like, I get it. You wanted to see boobs move around. You wanted them to talk about my balls, my balls, my balls. They're so slippery. But at least when anime gives these kind of beach episodes, they're more catered towards teenage boys because most of these shows that do this are for teenage boys. I don't know what's the demo for these. You do episodes like this, but then you have an episode with boogers coming out of people and spitting their dips and them eating it. And then you have an episode where Stimpy literally simulates getting gay sex made upon him. Like, what the hell? This is why adult animation isn't taken serious in the United States for the most part. It's because a lot of times these creators, writers, and directors are just taking their time to just get whatever they were mad at and taking onto this. It just feels like that storyboard jam of the Rugrats that came out. Like, and I get it, it's made in 2003. You had more leeway, especially with how the internet was being treated in a lot of ways. But yet the difference is that this was done on national television. And oh my god, why would you even think of this? There's a reason why it took so hard for a lot of shows. But yet then you have a show that was right next to it, like Stripperella, and as bimbo shit it was, Stripperella wasn't as bad as you think it would be because this is bottom of the barrel in a lot of ways. And I need to know, John K., what were you thinking with this? Was just not a good idea. And listen, I'm probably going to be getting comment sections about the things that he was doing as Joe, but I'm putting it in the light of being a critic of this and not what he did outside of the animation industry. It just shows that when you have to give restrictions towards writers and creators, they can actually do something better than giving them free carte blanche to write whatever the hell they want, because guess what? They'll do shit like this and have nothing in nuance to have in comparison. It's actually surprising with these shows that were attempted by Spike TV. They either thought that these would bring crowds that were too dumb, or it was dumbed down for their audience. But around this era of TV at this time, looking at the competition and its competitors, there's the teen and young boy demographic was attempting work for Spike TV, and it did, but it didn't work. For most of these shows, if they were on different networks, would probably have a better chance to actually be a show that would actually get more appreciation toward a lot of people. I think shows like Stripperella would have done wonders on Comedy Central or even MTV around that time, but knowing in a few years they would have had Nutcheck, so of course they would be perfect there. Ren and Stimpy is in the same ladder, but yet Terry the Rat would have probably been a Comedy Central show that would have just been there. Then yet again, this just in would have been Comedy Central as a joke. But this was the early years of Spike TV. Trust me, in a few years they'd have 1,000 Ways to Die, Answers, Ink Master, and a lot of things that would pretty much carry them back up. But like a channel that was just for men just wouldn't have worked. Not because it's for men, but it was the targeted demographic that they would have gone for. What would you even think about it early on? It's like G4, a good idea and concept, but knowing how limited that you can be, you kind of have to go to cop reruns just because of it. But hi everyone, I hope that you enjoyed this video and what I come up from it, and I just wanted to thank you for watching, and I want to know what was your favorite out of all these shows. And I know that all these shows have their own difficult issues, but I wanted to know what you think that where these shows would have flourished if it wasn't on Spike TV. Is there probably going to be another video coming out? Yes, but for the most part, I'm probably going to be planning for 2025 videos. But if you like this video, give it a like, comment for the sake of engagement, and for the most part, you can give me a subscribe if you like. Bye.
Return! I want to pet the pussy! Give me that turd! Oh, why?